Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So here I want to cover the Rustmonster. He is a pretty special companion with some unique abilities that I've never really tested, at least with regards to his companion equip bonus. First of all, he has the ability of Hypercorrosion, which claims it can reduce the armor of the target, causing them to take additional damage over time. Potentially that could be a debuff to increase our overall damage and everybody who attacks them, as it could allude to thinking you're reducing the enemy's armor, you're reducing their damage resistance, and so it would only make sense that everybody deals increased damage then against them, right? So let's confirm that, and then also his Rustmonster's presence. 10% chance on encounter use to reduce your target's critical severity by 7.5%, stacking up to 3 times. Does it even work? How does it stack? And should you be using it? In this video, let's find out. So first of all, we check out his effectiveness in combat against, say, a boss. When he goes and attacks, he can put the debuff on the enemy, Corrosive Touch. Now this, unfortunately, is just a damage over time effect with no actual armor reduction, as it would lead you to believe. Therefore, you will see no change in your output in damage when you do the testing. If we have a quick look at his actual effectiveness in his own damage output, we do find he's actually pretty good. Over 37,000 DPS puts him on this ranking at 32nd spot. So he's not the worst you could be using. But again, unfortunately, he doesn't actually have any ability that can reduce the enemy's armor as it says there. Now let's move on to his Rustmonster's presence. Does this work? Because stacking up to 3 times could lead you to reducing the enemy's damage output by 22.5% on critical hits. What I mean by this is enemies have critical severity. Whenever they critically hit you, they're going to deal extra damage. And this value is at 90%. We can work towards getting our own critical severity to 90%. Monsters just already have it at 90%. We can gain critical avoidance to effectively mitigate the enemy critical severity, meaning they would deal less damage to us on a critical hit. All the way up to, if we have 90% critical avoidance, then enemies effectively will deal 0 extra damage on a critical hit. So with this Rustmonster's presence, we can ultimately obtain quite a lot of damage resistance if this actually works by reducing those critical hits by upwards of 22.5%. That's pretty huge. Now, to check if this actually works, we can see we attack the target and a 10% chance when using our encounter powers can trigger it. We get the hand icon here, Rustmonster's presence, and it will last 10 seconds. And we can stack this up multiple times if we get lucky, because keep in mind again, it is just a 10% chance on an encounter use. Now on Rogue here, we're fortunate enough to have like 10 encounter uses every 10 seconds, averaging about to 1 every second, and you can see we already have 2 stacks there. And if we tack a bit more, we can potentially get even 3 stacks, which is the max as it claims here. I have gone and tested this in PvP versus other players to clearly see if it does reduce the enemy's critical severity and if you can stack it up between multiple people. Well, unfortunately, you cannot. It will only gain the stacks based on whoever has given the target the most stacks. So if I've put 1, somebody else puts 1, you'll still only reduce the target's damage output on their critical hits by 7.5%. If I manage to put 2 by attacking a lot and getting lucky, then we can even get to like 3. We will reduce the target's critical severity by 15% with 2 stacks and by 22.5% with 3 stacks. But again, you cannot have multiple people actually doing anything to reduce the crit severity. Only one person's stacks will matter. the person with the most put on the target. We can see evidence here of the stacks actually working to properly reduce the target's critical severity. This was checked in PvP. We then tested even up to 3 stacks, and there is some bug. It does work for like a fraction of a second to reduce the target's critical severity, like 4, 5, 6, 7 stacks, but it's like only momentarily, and then the stacks get reset back so that only one player is actually having any effect with their stacks. For example, we get to like 4 stacks here and it's only 20.6%. That's the equivalent of only 2 stacks because one player has put 2 stacks in the target and so has another player. And like momentarily they might have stacked here, but then a split second later, they'll go back to this. So there's a bit of a bug right there. But again, like I said, there is no point more than one player using this ability right now, which is unfortunate, especially since it has a 10% chance on an encounter use. Meaning, yeah, you need to be a class that uses an awful lot of encounter powers, even to just have 1 stack on the target. You can see a picture here again of testing it in PvP. This was just a fraction of a second where we had 4 stacks and we had 5.6% crit severity, which is a 30% reduction from our base. But like we said, it normally does not stack between players. The stacks do not refresh themselves and so fall off separately. You would have to output at least 30 encounter powers every 10 seconds to maintain 3 stacks. But even at just 7.5%, this bonus can be very effective, particularly in mitigation checks that can critically hit. And there's the catch. The attacks have to critically hit to make use of critical severity in order for this to be of any use. And so if you are considering using it for the mitigation check in, say, the last boss in the latest dungeon, the reworked Lair of the Mad Dragon, you would be, yes, mistaken to do so because that attack actually cannot crit and it doesn't even base off your defensive stats. You're just going to take a raw hit of a percentage of your hit points. And other attacks are like this too. You'll find in Tower of the Mad Mage, none of the mitigation checks actually critically hit because they balance it around just a flat damage output that you can then correctly like mitigate by using the right abilities rather than like a 50% chance he'll critically hit you and kill you if you weren't mitigating enough. And so a lot of the fights are like that in Zariel as well. So overall, the practicalities aren't really there other than reducing, say, other types of damage that in most cases a damage dealer should be able to avoid. And otherwise, you're just left with increasing the tankiness of, say, the tank who doesn't have maxed out critical avoidance yet. And so ultimately it is not a companion bonus I would suggest using. The chance to trigger is just too low and it doesn't work when multiple people use it. There's no point more than one person having it other than potentially trying to make sure that at least 1 stack is up. But at that point you may as well just have a bonus here that gives critical avoidance, and anybody who needs that would use it. And again, there's even better alternatives you can use than critical avoidance, like awareness or defense, which is going to work against all attacks. So my suggestion for the devs would be to update it a bit. Change it so that it doesn't have this 10% chance and reduce it down to maybe 5% per stack. Additionally, make it so that each new stack refreshes the previous ones, particularly if you do want to leave a chance to trigger on there. But definitely don't have it at 10%, at least have it at 25%, if not 50%. It needs to be reliable so people will use it. Like having it as a viable bonus for, say, a healer to use to support the team or even a tank would be appreciated. But as it stands, it's pretty useless. Additionally, the Rustmonster himself I believe could totally do with a little bit of an update, make his Hypercorrosion actually reduce the enemy's defense by maybe 5% tops, and make it so that he could potentially have 100% uptime on that if he can continually attack his target. Although 5% defense reduction might be a bit much, and as per the discussion with the Jagged Dancing Blade, they might want to change that over to like a damage debuff, so it just increases your damage against the target rather than actually interacting with defense. But at least then, if he had some role to play with regards to increasing the team's damage, he could be added to the list here of useful companions. And as it is right now, he's okay as single target, but there's still plenty of better options than him. So thank you for watching. I hope this was at least somewhat insightful. Another special thank you to all of these channel members for your extra support, and we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.